everybody, and welcome to the 33rd Annual Dinner for the Southeast Chicago Historical Society. My name is Anthony Arduino, and I'm a life member of the Society, a proud member of the Society. I'd like to ask everybody right now to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is right here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please take a seat. And I'd like to invite Father Wilford Bowling for the invocation for today's dinner. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Father Wilford Bowling. Myself, I'm the fourth generation member of Chicago. Grateful for being here. Now, we can, with these, humble ourselves before the Lord, and as we give thanks to God for all the many blessings we have offered, and the challenges and all the various things that we've faced in our journey of faith, and our Lord will now empower us with grace to continue with us faith journey. Father, as we, your children, like the old school, right? The old days of projection, and everyone, I speak hard and you listen soft. So we ask you, Heavenly Father, that you allow us to once again, with our journey of faith, open our ways to know better your love for us. And as we, a remnant people, a group of individuals who continue to allow our faith to blossom, we ask your mercies and graces that we may know more of what you would have us understand and do, helping our neighborhoods and helping our families, and learning of your love for us and sharing that with others. Bless our food that we are about to share today here, and our conversations and ways to know more how we might be open and willing to continue to be that servant you call us to be. Help us with our families to grow closer with each other, with our neighborhoods, and the knowledge of where we have come from so that we might share more with our future generations the right ways to live, the moral conduct to offer ourselves and others, to follow the examples that we lead. Help us to, with those people who are teachers and instructors, grace us to allow that lesson of life, that lesson of goodness, that willingness to share. Heavenly Father, bless this food, bless us together, bless our ways, and help us to always remember those who go hungry today as we make our name, our prayer, through your heavenly name. Amen.
Gosh.
All right, now we got it.
We're rest up.
Not you.
Well, I do what I do.
Bless us with a little power.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you very much. I want to mention too before we start dinner that if you take the time to please sign the back of your raffle ticket and drop it in the raffle, because we're going to be raffling off some great items at the conclusion of today's presentation. It's right there where Karen's got it. Also, we have some great display from courtesy of the museum and a picture that Ron Stanley put together. Also, too, in the back, if you got the chance, there's some flyers courtesy of Big Stream of Save Our Steel Jobs Before It's Too Late from the Alliance for American Manufacturing. There's plenty of copies up there. Please take some and sign it. And if you have any more questions, please see Vic in the back row over there.
I told him. I did break so.
Thank you once again for coming. We're going to start dinner very, very shortly.
Go ahead and keep on finishing your dessert right now. We're going to start with the installation of officers at this time for the Southeast Chicago Historical Society. Our Secretary Treasurer Carolyn Mulak is at a family function today and cannot be here. Their duties are as follows. The Secretary will be responsible for taking accurate accounts of all meetings, and for correspondence with outside agencies. The treasurer receives all monies and distributes funds according to the rules of the society, keeps an accurate record and gives an annual report to the membership. The vice president, Barney Janicki, will preside at all regular and special meetings and assume the various duties of the president in his or her absence. The president, Karen Brzezinski, presides at all meetings and to guide the society in all of its endeavors. So at this time, our present officers, please come up here. Now, please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name. Promise on my honor to faithfully fulfill all designated duties of my office. And I will do everything in my power to support all efforts toward assuring the future success and continued growth of the Southeast Chicago Historical Society. All this I pledge to do as a dedicated member of the organization. Thank you. Thank you. Now there will be a few words. Thank you. A few words now from Barney Janicki. Thank you.
I don't know, to me the mic sounds a little horrible or muffled or
If you get your mouth too close to the microphone, you overload it.
lower.
So keep it about a hand's width, this way, hand's width away from your mouth, it may help a bit. Like this, Barney.
Loud.
About that far away, try that.
Not very good. My hearing is not very good. So, anyway, a number of years ago, I went to Cal Park, big South Chicago, and walked around. I ended up seeing a field house and walked into.
Sorry about
Oh, and I walked into the museum, and I looked around. I said, "Oh, this is kind of a neat place. I've never been here before." And Frank Stanley then approached me, and we chatted for a while. And would you like to volunteer? Well, yeah, I don't mind volunteering, but I'm still working, and I'll probably be working for about 6 months or so. And when I'm through, when I retire, I'll come and see you. And so I went to see Frank, and lo and behold, 2 decades later, I'm still there. It's been a great experience, working with some wonderful people, all the way back to Frank Stanley and Alex Avistano, a number of them, and of course so many of them are gone already. But that's kind of a relatively young crew now. That includes Rod Sellers, being young compared to me, and so it's been continuing very well, I think. And Karen Brzezinski, who has been with us for a while, has already done some outstanding work. She's ambitious, she's eager, and she's young. So I think the museum's going to do quite well. And there's too many people to name, to thank, but I sure appreciate all those people that did help me. So, this one I can read. This year we have been, we've seen an increase in weekly visitors at the museum. You never know who will walk through the from the doors. As a matter of fact, the number of years I've been there, I saw maybe half a dozen people I hadn't seen for a long time, so it was a nice experience to see them again. Now we have 255 members, 93 regular members, and 144 live members. We beat that. Our Facebook page has about 2,500 members. We talked to Rod Sellers about that. This year we lost two of our members, Patricia Sangala and Antoinette Birch. Our sympathies go to their families. And our hearts were with you. Donations continue to come in. Some of the items we have been donated this year includes photos from the Eddie and Cooney football team, a 100-year-old invoice from the Calumet Railway, a clock face from Local 65, and memorabilia from Wright School and Bowen High School. Of course, you know that I was expounding on it that we have almost all the Bowen yearbooks, so if you want to do some research or just look around, I got a kick out of just looking at old yearbooks. So the office is, as you all know, it's open on Thursday, but in case you decide you want to be there some other day, you can just email us, or I'll make an attempt to open the museum on other day than Thursday. Recently, I brought a copy of the original charter of South Chicago Post, American Legion Post 493, and that charter is dated August the 10th of 1920. It gives the names and addresses of all those original members. Believe it or not, I knew one of them, Adam Camel, who was his son was a friend of mine. We went to school together and palled around together until the very end. And but I didn't know he was in World War I. And his name is on there, and along with all the other members. So I think if you have some idea that maybe you knew somebody or you of somebody, I think you can kick out of that. Right now the copy is on loan, Karen, but I think we'll probably get it as a permanent piece of document. One announcement. Remember, our museum cleanup day is on the Southeast. On Saturday, May the 21st, from 10 a.m. to 1 a.m.,
1 p.m.
we need to dust, sweep, and move items back to the original location. The place could stand a real good cleaning, so if somebody wants to join us that particular day, we're glad to have you. So, as Paul is saying this today, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Although not on the program today, there was a presentation by the young and tenacious Karen Brzezinski. Come on up, Karen. Go ahead.
Okay, this is a little token of the appreciation from all the members of the society for Barney, for everything that he's done. We have a presentation from Rod Sellers from the Calumet Heritage Partnership Board that Rod used to sit on. I took Rod's place, even though Rod is irreplaceable, I took Rod's place on the board. And this is from the board. It's from west of the I-94, but Mark Bowman says he thought you'd like it anyway. So it's memorabilia from the Pullman dedication. So I'll leave it up here if anybody wants to look at it after Rod's presentation, and then he'll be taking it home.
No, it'll go to the museum.
No, it's not going to the museum.
Well, folks, it's time for a presentation by Mr. Rod Sellers on the theme of this year. Up, Rod, do your thing. We're all here to support you. Enjoy the show.
We have about 2 minutes to get everything set up and hopefully everything works.
Okay, so far so good. The title of this presentation and our theme for the year is On the Streets Where We Live. And it's sort of a presentation that discusses the evolution of our street system on the southeast side, but also in the city of Chicago. This is a piece of art that sort of brings up street signs, and this was done by Rob Stanley. And he does a number of these things. You'll see at the end of the presentation some programs like this from individual neighborhoods. I asked him to put something together dealing with the entire southeast side, which we define as South Chicago, South area, East Side, and Hagerstown. And this is what he put together. There's a large copy of it on the table, and if you want one for your den or your family room, see Rob. Rob, raise your hands so they know who to see. Okay, now the question is, how did we get the streets that we have? And there's actually, I think, 4 major components. And one is one of the oldest laws in the United States, and that's the 1785 Land Ordinance, which virtually nobody knows about. The only reason I know about it is that I was a history major at the University of Illinois in Chicago, and I was setting up my schedule, and there was only one history class left at the time I wanted to take it, and it was United States Land Policy. I said, this has got to be the most boring class, but it fits. So I took it. And I was really amazed to see how important some of these laws are. There's also an Indian Treaty in 1816, and then the fact that Chicago, or actually the southeast side, was annexed to the city of Chicago in 1889, and then a very important law, again by somebody almost nobody knows, a guy by the name of Edward Brennan. Chicago streets were renumbered. And the reason for that was that as Chicago grew, it took on different villages, different territories, which had different ways of naming and numbering streets. So that's what we're going to look at. Okay. The Land Ordinance of 1785, and there's a lot of wording on here. I don't want to stand and leave it up here for a long time, so I'll kind of quickly go through it. The Confederation Congress, and this is the Congress of the United States before our current Congress was set up. They set up a land ordinance in 1785, which provided for surveying all the lands west of the original 13 colonies. And the idea was to raise money and provide land for veterans, education, transportation, and other things. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which provided for the creation of 5 additional states in what was called the Northwest Territory, and this included Illinois, was also passed by the Confederation Congress. And many people think that these are the only 2 laws that the Confederation Congress passed that were any good. So we ended up with a rectangular survey system. And this was to raise money, buy land sales, and they created a system where surveyors would go into an area and they would plot out the area into 6 by 6 mile areas, which were called townships. So each township has 36 1 mile by 1 mile areas. These are called sections. A section is a square mile or 640 acres. And this, you'll notice that 640 was selected because it's a number that's divisible by a whole lot of other numbers. It's not a decimal system, it's a fractional system. So land was sold or given away in multiples of 160 acres. 160 acres was a quarter section. It's a half mile by half mile, or in terms of city, it's 4 city blocks by 4 city blocks. It was a typical size of a small farm in the United States. If you ever fly from Chicago going west, you look down on farmland and all you see is a grid pattern of squares and rectangles. And that's because of these laws. If you go to the East Coast, you don't have that, because the original 13 colonies used the old European system where everything was set up by description of landmarks. So you'd have a landmark or you'd have a description of a piece of property, and it'd say from the bend in the creek to the old tree And of course, this created all kinds of problems because these things change. So they came up with this system, which was a much more rational system. So then, and you notice on this map, the countries that, or the states that don't follow this rectangular survey system are in white. Those are the original colonies and states, and they use the old European system. But all the states to the west, with the exception of Texas, which used the Spanish system, use the rectangular survey system. Now, Illinois was divided. First of all, they set up what's called the principal meridian, which is a line of latitude or longitude, and then the baseline is a line of latitude. And then they survey the area with reference to these imaginary lines. So the state of Illinois on the left, you notice up here, there's the third principal meridian, there's a baseline on the bottom, and there's a baseline on the left about halfway up. The darkened area is the first area in Illinois which was surveyed for sale, because early development in Illinois ran along the rivers. So down by the Ohio River in Illinois, that's where people were going. Nobody was going to Chicago at that time. So how did this affect the streets? Okay, section lines are a mile apart. 1 mile is 8 city blocks, or as we say in Chicago, 16 short blocks. Major streets are 8 blocks apart on section lines. So in Chicago, you know that major streets would be like 87th, 95th, 103rd, or Chicago Avenue, which is 800, you know, and then going up on the north side. I don't know anything about the north side, so don't ask me. The streets, the north-south streets, the major streets are also 1 mile apart or 8 blocks, or 16 short blocks off. The southeast side is different. The major arterial streets on the southeast side are not the same as the major arterial streets on the rest of the city of Chicago. Okay, so when they were surveying and developing Illinois, and this, I just put this up here because I found it when I was researching, and I found it kind of interesting. One of the early maps of Illinois does not show Illinois having an outlet on Lake Michigan. So Illinois would have been, in effect, an inland state, and if this had gone through, but it was changed, and so Chicago, Indiana never came to be. Here again, you see that these are counties in southern Illinois, and within the counties you can see the grid pattern. So even though this is mostly farm country and rural areas, it still follows a grid. So you have these this rectangular setup of land. Now Chicago's first street map was laid out by a guy named James Thompson. He's the first surveyor, and he set it up for the canal, the development of the Illinois-Michigan Canal, and the first lots, as it says up here, were sold on September 4th, 1830. He laid out the town, and much of this continues today, and we're responsible. There's a number of streets up there which still have the same names, although some of them have changed. But Thompson, by the way, was offered the choice of land in Chicago as payment for his survey, or a horse. And he took the horse, so he didn't have much faith in the development of Chicago at that time. Now this is just a map that shows townships that were set up in and around Chicago. This is in Cook County, and you look in the southern part, you've got townships like Bloom or Thornton Township, and they're pretty much squares. So that's where you get your 36 square mile section. The village, or the township of Hyde Park, followed more along the lines of the village of Hyde Park. So it's a little bit different. It's not just a square. It's a larger piece of land. Now, just put this up to show how important this is. The township numbers and all that are very much used for real estate sales. So your property description, for example, this is a quarter section. So this is 4 blocks by 4 blocks on the east side. The dotted lines sort of at the left middle are the old Pennsylvania Railroad tracks. This shows Avenue from right to left. It's A, B, C, D, and then the other side is Avenue E, and then it extends on. The area in the lower left, which is not subdivided at this time, has subsequently been subdivided. There are homes in there. That was right behind the house where I grew up, and that's what we used to call the prairie. There were no houses in it. Again, the dotted line being the railroad tracks. Okay, the second thing that comes up is the Treaty of St. Louis in 1816. And it was a treaty that gave up the rights to land 10 miles either side of the proposed route of the Illinois-Michigan Canal. These are the tribes. So this was designed to give the United States government land to build the canal and to raise money for the canal. So this is a map of Illinois showing the areas in the south and along the west that had already been subdivided. But then if you look up where Chicago is, you'll see that that area has not yet been divided. So here you've got the dotted lines running on a diagonal, and that would be the land that was provided for by this treaty. And then this is what it looks like without all the lines. In the middle curving line is the Illinois-Michigan Canal. I wish I had brought my laser pointer. Sorry. And then the straight lines on either side are the Indian boundary lines, and that was through that 1816 treaty. The canal itself, they started building in 1836, and was completed in 1848. This is just another map. This one shows you the subdivisions on the map. Okay, so how did that affect the streets on the southeast side? Okay, the land between the Indian boundary lines was surveyed first and was sold off and registered. The land south of the Indian boundary line was surveyed later, and it had different reference points. So on the rest of Chicago, 103rd Street, 111th Street are major streets. They're not major streets on the east side. And that's because the land south of the line was surveyed separately with different reference points from the land north of the line. The land south of the line used 138th Street, which is the southern boundary of Chicago, and the Indiana border as their reference points. So this is a picture of the southeast side, no lines, nothing, but it does show the Indian boundary line, which runs through Lake Calumet and meets with almost at the mouth of the Calumet River. This is one of the first maps of the area showing, it's a surveyor's map, and you can see the diagonal line, and you can see the squares on the top don't match the squares on the bottom of the line. And that's because they were surveys done at different times. This is a later rendition of the map. Shows the Calumet area. You can see very clearly the Indian boundary line. Only this one has names of property owners on it. So you can see who owned the land at that particular time. And again, most of the land was owned in 160 segments or even a 40-acre segment. You talk about a quarter section, that's 160 acres. You talk about a quarter of a quarter, you've got 40 acres. You might be familiar with the term 40 acres in a mule. That comes from the rectangular survey system. This is a close-up of the area around Wolf Lake. And it's a little hard to see, but you can see that Stephen A. Douglas, the guy who debated Lincoln and was a senator in Illinois and ran and lost for president of the United States, he was a major landowner in this area. Now this is a good map that shows you the different surveys north and south of the Indian boundary line, and it shows you the major streets. Okay, again, rest of Chicago, you start on the south side, you got 135th, 127th, 119th, 111th. But on the east side, you've got 138th, 130th, 122nd, 114th, and 106th, and 98th Street. Okay, these were set up as major streets. Now, it's not like the rest of Chicago, but these are still more important streets on the southeast side than these other streets on the rest of Chicago. So compare 106th Street on the southeast side with 103rd Street on the southeast side. Which one's more important? Well, it's 106th Street. Why? Because of this survey. Okay, something else that comes up now. The rectangular grid system sets up a grid pattern street. So all our streets in Chicago are pretty much squares, set up very evenly. But then you have diagonal streets. Well, where the heck did they come from? And they come from major Native American trails, and then when the railroads came in, they built their railroads on old Indian trails. Because the Indians knew where high ground was and where low ground was and stuff like that. Well, how many diagonal streets would you guess are there on the southeast side of Chicago? I think most people know South Chicago Avenue, you might know Brainerd Avenue. In doing a little bit of research, I found out that there are probably a whole lot more than you thought. So these are diagonal streets in Chicago, some of them fairly short. And Ewing Avenue is interesting because it starts as a diagonal on the north side, then it goes straight north and south, and then it becomes a diagonal again. So those of you who are reading that little bit in the program, it says, can you meet me at Ewing Avenue and Avenue O? The answer is yes, you can. Just drive down Avenue O, about 120th Street, look for that sign that says Ewing Avenue. Might want some money in the bargain too. Okay, 1889, City of Chicago grew tremendously. It went from 36 square miles to 168 square miles by annexing 4 different townships. The southeast side, South Chicago, Cummings, which is now South Erie, Colauer, which is now the east side, and Hegewisch were part of the village of Hyde Park. In 1889, they became part of the City of Chicago. So, map on the left shows the map of the City of Chicago before 1889. The street on the bottom is 39th Street. So that's how far Chicago went. And then there were a series of major annexations, and the village of Hyde Park, which is shown up here, which starts at 39th Street, ends at 138th Street, was annexed to the City of Chicago. Okay, what happened because of this? Chicago streets were a mess. And that's because as you annex all these different townships, they had their own street numbering system, they had their own street naming system. So some of the things that are up here, in Chicago in 1901, there were 9 Sheridan Streets, 9 Forest Streets. There were what this guy Brennan, who came up with a system for straightening it all out, he called them broken link streets. That meant you could be driving down a street and the street name would change. Then you'd be driving again and it would change again. And this is just because of the way these different townships came in. Interesting, the last paragraph says that the street just west of Halsted in Chicago was known by all those different names. So it was really a very confusing set. Okay, so Edward Brennan came up with a system, all right, for renumbering and renaming Chicago streets to make it easy. Well, we know Chicago, nothing's easy. So he started out saying that every mile would be 1,000 numbers. This was later changed to 800, which makes more sense since 8 blocks is a mile. So 800 numbers in a mile. Cottage Grove at 800 East is a mile west, is a mile east. That's wrong. Who did that? It's a mile, Cottage Grove is a mile east. No, wait, it is a mile west. Excuse me. Cottage Grove is a mile west, it's 800 numbers. Cottage is 800 east, Stony Island is 1600 east. He gave us the system for odd numbered houses on the east side of the street and on the south side of east-west streets. He wanted to abolish all duplicate names. In fact, his idea was to rename every street in the city, change it all. It didn't happen. And one of his ideas was that every mile would have streets beginning with different letters. So if you started at the state line, all the streets would be named with A. And then when you went to 1 mile west, you'd start with B. Well, that was, if you're familiar with what people call K-Town, where your west side of Chicago streets start with the letter K, and then a little bit further, the letter M. Those are the streets, that's the way Brennan wanted it, but he wanted it for the whole city. Okay, so Brennan introduced his plan in 1901, and you know the city council doesn't act real fast on anything. So it wasn't until 1908 and 1909 that the plan began to be put into effect. Many streets were changed. It mentions here in 1913, over 500 Chicago street names were changed. And the numbering system for streets was changed. This is a political cartoon from 1909 which shows a postman kind of befuddled by the new numbers. I mean, imagine if you're delivering mail in the city of Chicago, and all of a sudden all the numbers of many of the names of streets is going to change. People had to send out, this is an example, same old hammock, same old spot, only a new house number, but the same old block. And then they write down their new address so people can be informed about it. And this was a big deal because, you know, these are the types of things that they were putting and sending out because their address was changing. Now, the reason the loop took so long to change is because businesses were resistant to the change for financial reasons. Okay, Southeast Side streets. These are old names of streets. And it's part of your trivia quiz. We'll get the answers at the end of this program. But there were streets on the Southeast Side that included all of the names up here. How many of you know where Railroad Avenue was? How about Notre Dame Avenue, which I didn't even put up there, because there are more than what's up here. These are former street names in Southeast Chicago. Now this is an 1874 map of Chicago. It's one of the oldest maps that we have. The diagonal there is South Chicago Avenue, Anthony Avenue, and the railroad tracks that run along there. Let's kind of, it's a little hard to read, so let's see if we get a better. Now this is the area west of the tracks, and actually the area that we call Calumet Heights. It's not technically part of South Chicago, but if you look at the street on the far left, you can see Ashcombe Avenue. Ashcombe was actually a Potawatomi native Indian chief. And one of the streets in the Southeast Side was named for him. Of course, it doesn't exist anymore. Anybody know what street that is? It's just west of Saginaw. Colfax, thank you. So Colfax used to be Ashcombe Avenue. So your quiz, are you done? Anguish is very interesting because this is the original this is the original property map for sale of land in Anguish. And I'm going to zoom in on it so it's a little hard to read like this. But if you take a look, these are the main streets in Anguish. Okay? Recognize any of them? Any of them still there? Houston is still there, but it moved. Mackinac is there, and for some reason it's plotted out on the far right side. Now, these are the streets from, okay, this map faces north. Now, I can't write sideways on PowerPoint. I know it can be done, but I can't do it. So I showed the changes here. So what I've done is I flipped it. So the map actually now is pointing west. Okay, so if you start with Houston, it's now Crandolet. And by the way, English spells Crandolet wrong. If you go and find out who Crandolet was named after, the second O is actually an E. Okay, but that's the way English does things. And then you go down, you've got Houston, which of course is changed because it moved. South Chicago Avenue became Erie, and then later became Baltimore. English Avenue became Ontario, and then became Brandon. Superior became Burley. Aberdeen became Buffalo, and Mackinac is still there. So these are streets east of Avenue O. Where's Avenue O? Well, it used to be known as the Strand. It's one block east of Green Bay, right? So you've got the Strand, which is Avenue O, Argyle, and so on. And you can notice the heavy German influence of names there. It's because Hegwisch himself was German, wasn't Polish. But these are the streets as they exist today. And there is an Avenue K in Hegwisch. This is just, I came across this in doing research. It's an 1889 Hegwisch business directory. And it's interesting because they didn't even use house numbers. If you look up here, it tells you, for example, the first person, Joseph Conway, he lives on Hegwisch Avenue, which we know is Baltimore, right? Lived on Hegwisch Avenue, second lot north of 135th. That's how they gave you addresses back in 1889. And this is kind of just up here for any of these things you want to see, we've got them in the museum. Notice the busiest type of business in Hegwisch? Saloons. There are more saloons than anything else. More saloons than grocery stores. Okay, so now, this whole thing about changing street names. Now, this is an excerpt from the Daily Calumet, 1894. And they were talking about a number of street names that needed to be changed. Okay, and they talked, this is advocated by the alderman at that time, a guy by the name of Shepherd. And again, there's a lot of reading here, but it's not so important that you read it all. Here again is an article about a meeting that they had, a public meeting to rename some of the streets in South Chicago. And 3 of the streets that they decided on changing were Erie, Huron, and Ontario, which later became Baltimore, Burley, Baltimore, Brandon, and Burley. Well, at that time, they came up, one of the names they suggested was they named, what later became Burley, Superior, they wanted to name it Brazil. This came up at a meeting, and somehow it got through. So the next day, the Cal went crazy, but you can't name a street in South Chicago after Brazil. The net result was that none of these street names got changed. So they left them there for quite a while. There were all kinds of articles that came up periodically regarding changing street names. So here, for example, the column in the middle is kind of interesting. If you read it, you understand it, you better than I am. Okay, the name of Ewing has been changed to Avenue K, from 96 to 106. What about the rest of it? Avenue F will be Avenue G, 108 to 110. Sure, that makes sense. Avenue G has been named Avenue H. Avenue H has been renamed Avenue J. Avenue I, now it's Avenue I, I've never heard of that, has been changed to Avenue H, and so on. I mean, it's tremendous confusion in these early years. Here again, another one where they want to change. Edwards has been changed to Escanaba. Duncan has been changed to Sherman. So if you're doing genealogy and you're back around 1890, 1900, you need to know these changes in order to find out what the heck you're talking about. Okay, here's a map, South Chicago. This is that same 1874 map. First street on the left is Houston. Next you have Erie. Next you have Ontario. The dotted line in the middle are the old IC-B&O railroad tracks. But in 1913, 500 city Chicago streets were changed, the names. And that's before Google. Here are a couple of photos where some of the sidewalks in here, and these are from 1979, but some of the sidewalks still show the old names. Okay, this is an 1892 Rand McNally map. Okay, and this is the east side, and if you look closely at the streets, you'll find that some of them are named after alphabet, and some of them are named for numbers. So it's like, what's going on here? And I mentioned that to kind of rebut a myth about the east side streets. This is a map of Colauer, which is the east side. It's looking towards Lake Michigan, so this map faces east. On the bottom, you can see 2nd Avenue. That was actually Avenue M. So this would be off of 95th, right as you cross over the bridge going into the east side. So you've got 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Ewing is actually 5th Avenue, or was 5th Avenue at one time. And then you've got 6th, 7th, and 8th. Again, that's 1904. Streets are named for numbers. Now, this is something that caused some problems at the museum a number of years ago, because this postcard says this is Avenue G, okay, looking north from 100th Street. That's just as you come into Cal Park. But Avenue G is in the park. The first street that's got houses is Avenue H, right? So, what was it? That was because at that time, Avenue H was Avenue G. I'm not confused by now. Give me time, I'll get you. This is another postcard. We've got Avenue H looking north from 99th. And of course, the most notable landmark there is the church. Well, this is the original site of the church that now sits at 110th and Ewing. United Methodist Church, they originally started at 98, but they started at 98th and Avenue J. But the postcard says Avenue H, because again, the street names were different. This is an ad from the old Calumet, which advertises a dance at Avenue K, Breakers Hall. So there was an Avenue K on the east side at one time. And these are some other street names that occurred over time. All right, so again, you can see that there's a lot of reason for confusion. Now, in addition to street names changes, there were street number changes, because these are ads from the Daily Calumet. And here's one, it's 279 92nd Street. Well, if you were doing that today, you'd be looking down around State Street for 279. But this was in South Chicago. Same thing here, 241 92nd Street. And it was only the east-west streets that had this numbering system that was so much different from what we have today. All right, here are just a couple more ads from the Daily Calumet. And again, 190, 192nd, 246, 92nd. Well, here's where those and how those translate. And there's actually, the Chicago Historical Museum has done a document which gives you the old and new addresses in Chicago. So if you had an old address, wanted to find out where it was, go to that document, it'll tell you what the current address is. Now, that's bad enough that they're so far off. What's even more confusing is the fact, and I know it's a little hard to read, but is that if you take the same north-south street at different points along the east-west streets, the address changes. So 292, if that's at Commercial on 92nd Street, it might be somewhere else on 87th Street. So that's what this shows, that there's no consistency here. So Green Bay at 95th here is 231, but at 106 is 461. So again, we've got all this confusion coming up. This is just kind of an interesting thing showing all kinds of Chicago streets. There's actually a couple of Southeast side streets up there, but where do our names for streets come from? Okay, people, places, things, that makes sense. But then something we often forget, real estate development. Okay, here are some examples, and I didn't put every one. There's actually a book on the table over here called Streetwise Chicago, where a couple of Sun-Times reporters wrote the origin of every name in the city of Chicago. So, who's it named after? Where did it come from? All right, Anthony Avenue, okay. Ashcombe, I mentioned, Potawatomi Chief. And here's some of the others, and I'm not going to read each here. We had a long afternoon. Some more, and it's interesting, Ewing Avenue, people assume is named for a local, because there was a Ewing involved in early East Side history, but it's not. The 1951 East Side Centennial Commemoration booklet said, on October 15th, she, a Potawatomi woman named Toga, sold a section of land around Calumet to George W. Ewing. Now here's where it's wrong. This must be the same George Ewing for which Avenue K was changed to Ewing Avenue years later. Actually, Ewing was a governor and senator from Illinois. He was not a local. Okay, some more people. Edward Brennan, who came up with the street numbering system for Chicago, and something I forgot to mention, which is probably critical, the State in Madison. That all numbers run from State in Madison, okay, using that grid system. Brennan actually has a street named after him in Jeffrey Manor. Very small street in Jeffrey Manor. And here are some others who were named after people. This is actually an obit for General Torrance, who was involved a lot with the Wisconsin Steel original property, at that time the Joseph H. Brown Mill. And then streets are named after places. Well, you know Baltimore Avenue is in Maryland, and we've got Baltimore Avenue here. I don't know why, but it is. People would often name, developers would often name places after the place they came from. That's further common. Escanaba, Marquette, Muskegon, Saginaw, Mackinac, Green Bay, those are towns in Michigan. And also streets in the southeast side. Okay, the street's named after things. Buffalo Avenue was named after the avenue, that makes sense. Mackinac Avenue is named, it's named for an Ojibwa, it's a Native American tribe from this area. Chief, and it actually means turtle. Calumet was a peace pipe, Stony Island was a geological term. And then we get real estate developers. These are people who came in, subdivided land, and sold it for housing. Okay, Bensley, Marion, Van Vlissingen, and Lewis. I'll talk a little bit more about some of these people. Okay, this is an aerial view of Marionette Manor, which is next to Jeffrey Manor. And this is the section that pizza delivery drivers hate, because all the streets in Chicago are straight. You want to go from one place to another, you get on one end of the street and you drive. Well, Marionette Manor was set up like a suburb, with cul-de-sacs and things like that, so we guarantee you get lost in Jeffrey Manor. This is a view of the Van Vlissingen plan. This is a guy who wanted to develop Lake Calumet for commercial investment and wanted to set it up that way. Well, the point is he ended up having a street named after him in Jeffrey Manor, which is Van Vlissingen. Now, here's where we run into some discrepancies. Most people give Frank J. Lewis, who was a real estate developer, credit for the Fair Ounce system and the Avenue A, B, C streets. But if you look at old maps, you will find streets named for the avenues prior to that. So here's an 1890 real estate map, and you can see Avenue N, Avenue M, Avenue L. So Lewis did not develop this. Sorry to burst anybody's bubble. But people on the east side are very stubborn, and they are very, very possessive of this system. So these are T-shirts that Annunciata was selling. I learned my alphabet on the east side, which of course means you don't have any, you don't have an Avenue I, and you don't have an Avenue K, and you don't go beyond Avenue O. Okay, intersections are kind of important when you talk about streets, because this is where people meet. And by intersections, you could be talking junctions, crossroads. People say, where are you going? I'm going to the corner, Ma. That kind of stuff. Well, these are various meeting points. Now, in Hegewisch, you might recognize this. This is the area 132nd or 133rd, 134th, Baltimore, Brandon. That's kind of the meeting place in Hegewisch. Now, you go to the east side, and at one time, that meeting place was down around 98th and Ewing. And I don't know if you think of it or make the connection, but 98th and Ewing, there's a stoplight. Why? Because that's on a section line. That's one of those major arterial streets that we're supposed to have. So these are all photographs from around 99th and 100th Street and Ewing Avenue. Way before that, in South Chicago, the Hampton place was on Green Bay Avenue and Avenue O, which they then called the Strand. So these are pictures from a 1910 document talking about the bush in the area outside the mill. This never happened, but you wonder why not. 79th and Stony, which is a six-corner intersection, 79th Street, Stony, and South Chicago Avenue all meet there, but that never really became all that big a deal. 91st and Commercial, pretty important. Oblex was located there, but that wasn't as important as some of the other places. Now, in 1946, the city of Chicago came up with a planning map showing where different important intersections would be located in the future. For Hegewisch, it was Baltimore and Brandon, 133rd to 134th. And that's what that area looks like. This is actually mid-70s. South Deering, it's along Torrance Avenue, especially the corner of 106th and Torrance. So these are pictures of 106th and Torrance. For the east side, it's the area around 106th and Ewing. And remember, 50 years before this, 60 years before this, it was the area around 98 and Ewing. And these are two pictures of 106th and Ewing. This is before, the one in the top left is before development, and you've got the Mausen Tavern, a little hard to see, but you can see the Willie hardware store across the street, but the rest of the street is residential. And down on the bottom, you've got a group of people probably waiting for a bus with the East Side Gate in the background. And this is a more recent picture of the East Side during one of the old-fashioned day celebrations. And South Chicago, of course, which is the oldest of the four Southeast Side communities. You've got Commercial Avenue. These are various pictures of 92nd and Commercial. And you can see why 92nd and Commercial, even though it's not on a major arterial, became so important. Anybody know why? Transportation. Trolleys, buses, that's where you transfer. The number, remember what? Way back when, the number 5 trolley, but for people my age, there's a number 30 South Chicago bus, number 27 South Deering bus. That's where those buses met. And this is a picture taken by Joe Mulak in kind of the heyday of Commercial Avenue in the shopping district. This is probably an early 70s picture. South Chicago was over that. Okay, over the years, streets and news. Okay, first of all, Hegewisch was always sort of a stepchild to the rest of the Southeast Side. They were not connected. In other words, how do you go from Hegewisch to the East Side? How do you go from Hegewisch to South Deering? Well, in the early years, this is from in 1892, they suggested a road connecting the East Side and Hegewisch. It never got built. Hegewisch and South Deering were connected by a road called the Chittenden Road, and sometimes it's given as Crittenden, but Crittenden or Chittenden Road, and there was a bridge that crossed the Calumet River. And here in 1908, they're talking about a new road to Hegewisch, another new road to Hegewisch, another new road to Hegewisch, which never got built. Let me go to the next one because it's, this one, if you look, the grid pattern on the bottom next to the red line is Hegewisch. And then you can see a line going up to the left. It's not exactly straight, but it's on a diagonal. That's the Chittenden Road and Bridge. It crossed Torrance Avenue. Or, I'm sorry, it actually was there before Torrance Avenue. One time they had a plan, they were going to make 130th Street 100 feet wide from Indiana Avenue into Hampton. Of course, you know that you still can't go down 130th Street. This is for the Burnham Viaduct, okay? This is for a bridge crossing Burnham Avenue south of Brainerd, when you get into Burnham and then going into Calumet City. The problem with this was Avenue O did not connect. In other words, Burnham Avenue ended at Brainerd, and there was no street. So this is from 1928, and it's a couple of years after that Avenue O was finally built, connecting the east side of Hegewisch. And it was because of the Burnham Avenue Bridge being built. 1940, how do you get from the southeast side to the loop? Before the Skyway, before expressways, okay? Well, they came up with this plan. They were going to do Illinois-Illiana Drive, which connected Bond, Baker, Mackinac, Ewing, and Avenue L. That would have been your main connection. They would have made other improvements, but it was, eventually it became outdated with the development of the Skyway. Back when the Skyway opened in 1958 and until it was a quarter, you could actually afford it. Okay, this kind of an interesting little tidbit. 87th Street did not go through from, say, Commercial Avenue east to Mackinac. That's because there was a railroad yard there, B&O railroad tracks. And that actually doesn't get opened up until 1946. So people who worked in the mill but lived west of the railroad tracks had a heck of a time getting to work. So this was a big deal, having this improvement. Okay, we all remember the yellow street signs, right? Now we have green street signs. How about the brown street signs? You might notice those, they're around. City of Chicago's gone crazy with these things, and it's for honorary streets. Okay, honorary street names include anything and everything. Anything you can get an alderman to recommend to the city council and get christened an honorary street in Chicago. So we have people up there who have nothing to do with Chicago. We've got companies. Super Dog Way in Chicago is an honorary street. But we're more, there's a Hallelujah Avenue in Chicago. Brown street signs. Not used for location or finding or directions, but they're there. Pay attention to them on the way home. You might find a few. Okay, given Chicago's propensity, there are, I think there's close to 1,300, 1,400 honorary streets in the city of Chicago. Each alderman is allowed to introduce 2 honorary streets per year. And they do, because they're popular, So, how many honorary streets do you have on the southeast side? You just take, in your own mind, just take a guess. How many? Well, okay, let's look at some of them. Helen Bushio Way, 114th Street between Avenue M and Avenue O. And it makes sense, because Helen Bushio was a longtime assistant principal of Washington High School, which is right here. Okay, Officer John Matthews, police officer who was killed in the line of duty, who lived in Hegewisch, 131st and I believe, we'll see in a minute. This was the dedication of his street, honorary street. Just recently, when they dedicated the Hegewisch World War II Memorial Tank last November, they named the street Edward Jarmuska Avenue. Ed was very active in getting that tank over to Hegewisch, and he had a street named after him. And here you go. Now, this is hard to read. I apologize. But there are actually 37 honorary streets in the southeast side. Okay, and you've got a quiz right there with 10 of them. So we'll look at some of the answers to that quiz. Some of them make a lot of sense. if you know the history of the people. Okay, 37 honorary streets in Southeast side. Edward Brennan, who came up with the numbering system, has an honorary street, but it's at State and Madison. If you think about it, that's where it ought to be. It's at State and Madison. However, Brennan Avenue, as I said, it's just a short street. It's not even that long. It's less than 2 blocks long in Jeffrey Manor. And it's not in Jeffrey Manor, it's a green sign, not a brown sign. And here are the answers to your quiz. So, Strand was Avenue O, Ashton was Colfax, Illinois Avenue was State Line, Superior was Burley, Indiana Boulevard became Indianapolis, Erie is Baltimore, Bismarck is Avenue N, Bond Avenue is South Shore, Howard Street is Brainerd and Anchorage, and Avenue B is another name for Green Bay. I'll have a key up here if you want to check it. And here are the honorary streets. Carmel Harvey Drive. Carmel Harvey was killed during Vietnam. He was the Medal of Honor recipient. And Brainerd Avenue in Anchorage is named for him. Alderman John Buchanan Drive is 126th place, which is the street for the Ford Supply Department. Fallen Soldiers Corner, we have one of those signs over there. I don't know where we got it. I'm not sure if somebody ripped it off and gave it to us. But anyway, we got it, Fallen Soldiers Corner, which is 91st Street, across from Our Lady of Guadalupe. Sally Culhane Way is Avenue H, 100th Street to 98th. She was the principal at Taylor Elementary School. Reverend Lawrence Strauss was the minister from the church at 110th and Ewing. Wheaties Boulevard was Muskegon Avenue. And Wheaties is actually the only one I couldn't find the year for the city council approval. William G. Christie Way is 106th Street. Bill Christie was associated with Harmony Hot Dogs and hamburgers. Neil Basango Way, 85th in Green Bay. James Fitzgibbons Drive. James Fitzgibbons, the founder of the East Side Historical Society, which became Southeast Chicago Historical Society. 100th Street, near the tank. That little street that connects Ewing and Avenue L behind the tank. And Helen Bushido Way, she was a teacher or assistant principal at Washington High School, is 114th Street. So there you know a little bit more now than when you came in. Okay, to finish, we'll just kind of take a look at some of the street kinds from other areas. These again are artworks courtesy of Rob Stanley. Interested? See Rob, I'll get you one. There's English. These are the streets for the east side. This is South Deering, and here's South Chicago. And I had enough.
Thank you, Ron, for that presentation. Thank you.
I want to thank Rod. I also want to put in my pitch that I put in all the time in the newsletter. Come to the museum, volunteer. In the last 2 months, I can honestly say the attendance has really increased. We have a girl there now. She's doing research on the steel mills for her dissertation. She's been there this summer. I don't know when they're starting. But on the old tennis courts behind the field house, they're going to be building a floating museum. It's going to be a boat. They're going to build that this summer. And then it's going to be floated, I'm not quite sure where. But they'll be building, where? Down the Calumet River. So that's going to be built this summer. We've had a lot of artists come in and look at different things. So there's a lot going on at the museum. And like I said, you never know who walks in the door. Joanne, myself, and Jim Klukowski, tomorrow we're going to be TV show from the WICU. U is coming to film tomorrow at the museum. I don't know, it's called Hidden Gems of the City. I don't know when it's going to be on, but if anybody has access to Facebook, Ron will put down when it's going to be on TV. So there's a lot going on, and some of you may be aware, some of you may not. This whole area, the Calumet, there's a whole plan now going forward to name this a heritage area, which is going to do nothing but increase tourism and access to this area by lots of different people. And the museum's going to be, I think, a pretty good focal point for that. So we're trying to slowly drag ourselves into the 21st century, slowly. We'd also like to see how everybody else, even if you only came one Thursday a year, it would really help sometimes, to greet people. Sometimes there's people wanting to ask questions, and Joanne is our main historian, and Rod is our other main historian. I know very little, but I'm always anxious to hear everybody's stories about growing up in South Chicago, the East Side, Megwish, and South Terry. So with that, we will begin our raffle. Thank you very much. Hope to see you next year or at the museum.
Your wish was fulfilled.
Yeah, very thank you.
Wow. My card, right?
I'm driving. We told the neighbors that, I'm just the other side of